Today on the Unlocking Your Book podcast. The plan of God is wonderful, and we need to know his plans. We need to know his hopes for us. We need to know what our dreams are, but it's a whole other mamba jamba to actually conform your life to the image of God's plan and say, I could do all these other things, but it's not in conformity with who I am and within the lanes that God has given me. Be sure to get our mini workshop that unlocks you and your book. We have even included a 2-part session to write your first book chapter with our team so that you can get your message out to the people that need to hear it, get immediate access to it all at www.unlockingyourbook.com. Well, friends, my name's Troy Brewer, and I'm the senior pastor at Open Door Church in Burleson, Texas. I've been pastoring that church for about 30 years, and we direct food banks. We have food banks all over the world. My wife and I, we build orphanages all over the world. We save boys and girls out of sexual trafficking all over the world. We've been doing that for more than 30 years now, and we've rescued 6 kids in the past 4 days, and I'm so excited about them. And my wife has actually just landed in Doha, and she's on her way to Uganda. She'll be in Uganda tomorrow, and we're going to meet our latest 3 baby rescues. I'm so excited about that. And so, I'm a 6th generation Texan. I'm a 16th generation American. I grew up in rural Johnson County, Texas, and I am a drop dead, sold out Jesus freak. I'm madly in love with the Lord. I have the zeal of the Lord, and I'm all about maintaining my passion for Jesus and helping other people maintain their passion and to own the impact of things. And so because of that, I thought it would be a good idea for me to become a writer. And that's kind of one of the main reasons I got into writing books. Okay, well, number one, let me just commend everybody that's on this all over the planet Earth and just say thank you for wanting to do better. Thank you for going after it. Nobody can make us do those things. You know, it's one thing for God to give you the plan, and then it's a whole other thing for you to conform your life to the image of that plan. It's one of the most powerful things I learned very early in my walk with Jesus is that the plan of God is wonderful, and we need to know his plans. We need to know his hopes for us. We need to know what our dreams are, but it's a whole other mamba jamba to actually conform your life to the image of God's plan and say, I could do all these other things, but it's not in conformity with who I am and within the lanes that God has given me. I only have so much brain space. I only have so many hours within a day. I only have so many years within my lifetime, and to actually be dedicated and committed to the things that will bring you into excellence, that will actually bring you into maximum impact is something that we have to learn. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for studying. Thank you for going after this. Thank you for deciding that, no, I'm not going to do this at a minimum level. I'm going to do this in a right way, and I'm going to go after it because I'm doing this for Jesus. I'm doing this in his name, and it needs to look a whole lot more like heaven than it looks like hell. And I say that about my mind, about my life, about the culture that we have in reaching out to people in church life and leadership. I want it to look like, I want people to leave there looking at that and going, that doesn't come from Texas. That comes from heaven itself. And so I commend you guys in this. If I was to take you through my journey in writing books and the books that I've written, if you know anything about any of my books, and it's okay if you don't, they're very diverse. They have a common thread that goes through it, but they're very diverse in fields because I'm the kind of guy that has to have 25 windows on at one time. If I got my computer, I will have a mass of things open at once. And I have a very broad interest in all kinds of different things. I'm a big time musician. I love music. I love playing music, and I like all different kinds of music. And that's just one small part of me. That's just one tiny small part of me. So when it came to writing, and I knew that I bet you that once I start writing, I bet all my books will be on various different subjects. And I'm like, why would I do that? Am I doing that just because I need to write a book and I need to check that? No, I'm somebody that really has to I have to know that it's going to make impact, and I need to know that it is making impact. So going back into my early journey of writing, my daddy was a very professional songwriter and actually made a living songwriting when I was a little boy. And so I was very interested in songwriting. And I learned the structure of songs. I can remember I first learned to rhyme. And before I learned to put together a song, I learned to just put words in other songs, kind of like Weird Al Makovich, or whatever that guy's name is that he does it now. And I did that at first and just did my own words. And then I began to learn music. And then I began to learn structures of songs. And then I began to learn composure. And then I finally got into production. And then lo and behold, when I got saved in 86, it meant that I could go to work for a big record company. And I got picked up by Word. And then I went to work for Myrrh. And I was just a songwriter. And one of the reasons why that they hired me was not because I was the greatest songwriter in the world, but because I could just put out content, constantly put out content. And I knew structures and I knew what musicians had to work with. Well, that made my craft valuable. And even if they didn't like my words, they would like my music. And if they didn't like my song, they would like my bridge. And if they didn't like my bridge, they might just like my intro. And so they would use my things, and I would begin to hear pieces of my songs on the radio all the time going, that's wow. And I would understand the contribution that I made. And I found out that making a valuable contribution is very, very, very important to me. That's a big drive to me. When I was a little, I started writing not just songs. What I found out is my friends thought that it was very lame for me to be writing poetry, and I love poetry. And they thought it was lame. So I remember in 75 when Star Wars came out, I was in elementary school. And so I started writing sci-fi stories. And my mom got me all of these books, it just said journal on the front of it, or it said record on the front of it. And it was hardbacked. And then I would just begin to write stories, and I would put my friends in it. And I would beg my teacher, please let me read this in front of the class. And so she would let me read a little segment at a time, and she would let me do that. And if my friends made me mad, I would have their spaceship crash into a nebula, or, go through some horrible black hole or something like that. And that was what I did. I even came up as a second grader. I began to write in cursive a signature that would look good on a book. And I just began to go crazy with it. And then I began to study signatures. And my favorite signature that I found as an elementary school student was Sam Houston's signature. I loved his signature, and I loved how it had a tornado underneath it. So to this day, I've got this wild signature that no matter what I write on, it always has to have a tornado under it. So I can definitely see that the Lord was prepping me when I was little. I could see that he was doing that. And I could see that he just made me interested in certain things. But I think that the leg up that I had was that I would actually study it and find out, what are the top level people? How is it done? Well, what does it look like? And I would just start to jump into that as if I knew what I was doing. I also begin to study as I begin to get into book writing. I begin to study in a big way the structures of books. I actually went and bought a bunch of romance novels and looked at the structure of romance novels and went, what is the structure of those books like that compared to a different kind of a book that's like a reference book. And so I love reference books, and I love books of lists. I love those kinds of things as well. And I would look at the difference between how they were written and why. What does it look like? If it's going to flow through, what is that supposed to feel like? If you're reading a romance novel, I would imagine that feels like an encyclopedia. That's not going to work. And if you're looking at an encyclopedia, I would imagine that feels like a romance novel. That's not going to work. So I began to look at it as far as genres, and begin to look at it as far as how the actual writing composition worked, because I wasn't educated. And so I've never been to college or any of those things. And that's not a prideful thing for me. I'm just like, man, I'm just not going to let that hold me back, and I'm going to go. I also begin to study. Once I begin to get real about writing, I begin to study working environments that actually work for me. because what I found is when I'm wearing my hat that is the leader of whatever organization I'm running, that's not a creative place where I can actually get creative and be full of inspiration. What I found is that the stress and the anxiety of making the machines work is kryptonite to the creative part of me. And so I run a whole lot of organizations, and there's just a lot of hard work that goes with that. And I've learned to, in my day or within my week, say, these are these days and those are those days. But the two of them do not make sense to me. I have to actually segment those things out, and I have to be very intentional about that. So I began to study writing environments, and then I began to study writing styles. And so like Da Vinci, I began to study, how did Da Vinci remain creative and what did he do? And he, very much like me, probably had ADHD off the chart. And so he would always have 10 or 15 projects going on. And as soon as he got bored with one project, he would stop and he would start working on another one. And then he would stop and he would start working on this. And then he would stop and he'd start working on that. That was interesting to me. And that actually does work for me. And I'll explain that here in just a minute. And then I went to Key West, and I went to Hemingway's writing room, and I discovered, I just want to say, how did Hemingway write? What is that all about? And I'd already had an interest in Hemingway because I was in northern Uganda and I came across his aircraft wreckage. And so on the Nile, and my guide that was with me said, you know that was Hemingway's plane? And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. And I was like, whoa. So I began after that. I just thought, man, the Lord brought that to me. I think I might need to study this. And so I did. I began to study it and I began to look. And then in the midst of that, I found out exactly what his writing style was and what his room was, and that he built a room that was separate from the rest of the activities of the house. And he actually intentionally made a walk bridge, a second story walk bridge, so that when he left his bedroom and he walked across that open space, that he would begin to get in his mind, he was going into a different place. I, being very, very, very intentional, I was like, that also makes sense to me. Mark Twain is one of my favorite writers, and I love Mark Twain's writing room in his situation. I probably learn more from him than anything else. And so I have actually set up my writing room to be a lot like Mark Twain's, and it goes like this. I will be creative and I will work and work and work. And as soon as I start to feel the anxiety of the workload, I stop what I'm doing and I have a lot of games inside my room and I start getting creative again. So I have all kinds of fun things to do inside my room. And when I get very intentional about the writing part, I also had to get extremely intentional about the play part. So if I'm going to spend 4 hours writing, I'm not going to be writing for 4 hours. I'm probably going to be writing for probably about 3 hours. And an hour of that is stopping and then me doing this, me doing that, me doing this, so that I can remain within that creative process. Okay. So it's also very important too, that in order for me to get started in something, since I'm ultimately a visionary, I have to know where the landing place is. That's very important to me, to know where the landing place is. So I want to know, okay, when this thing is finished, what is it that I'm trying to get across to people and where am I going to put it? That's very, very, very important to me. It's extremely important to me. So I will get started. And once I get started, when I say I'm getting started, I basically, in a lot of people's minds, I think that I would already have the book already completely written in a lot of people's minds, because I am constantly collecting the information to write books all the time. So like if you look at like the diversity of my books, Looking Up is the last book I just came out with, and it's on astronomy and how the stars work. The one before that was Redeeming Your Timeline, and it's on physics and how time works and how redemption comes into your time frames. And then the one before that was Good Overcomes Evil. And then the one that was before that was Living Life Forward. Those are completely different subjects, but I'm thinking about those things all the time. So whenever I come across something and I go, hey, you know what, this is awesome, and this could be a part of my book, I stick it into a file. And for me, that's an electronic file. And then after it accumulates and accumulates and accumulates, I will go to it and I will have a work day with those. And I will begin to, since I understand structures of books, I'll begin to look at and go, you know what, this is a segment of a chapter, and this is actually a chapter. And these chapters will go into this segment or that segment or this segment or that segment. Okay. And so I'll be like, okay, I will accumulate all those things. And then I will sit down. Then I will decide, what are my chapters? What are my segments? And then I will begin to put those things together. And then finally, when I'm ready to actually write the book, I'm going to get away, and I'm going to get away from everybody. And I'm going to spend a few days actually putting that thing together and putting it all together. I keep taking everything that I've accumulated, taking the structure that I've already got, because those are different processes for me, and then actually building the book out of that and writing in all the fillers. That's what I'm going to do. Now, the reason why I do that is because if I write a book over a period of a year, when I read the book, it's like 25 different books in one book, and it's like 25 different people wrote the book. It'll have a different feel from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. And if I want that to be uniform, I have, in the way that I write, I have to pull that off in a short amount of time. So because I've done it the other way, I've it was actually Soul Invasion, I think. When I first wrote Soul Invasion, I wrote that over, I don't know, I would say probably about a year-long period. And whenever I did that, whenever I put all that together, I just kind of, hey, as I accumulated it, I actually wrote, a chapter, or I wrote something like that. What I found at the end of the year, when I got ready to read that book, it was like 10 different books, and it wasn't even the same writing style, because I was going through different things throughout the year, and different things were having tremendous impact on me. And it was weird. I was like, oh my, what did I do? What was I thinking? And so I was like, what did I do wrong with that? I pulled out all the information. I decided what the structure should be for a book that was like that. And then I spent some time putting together that actual structure of the book. And then when I got together, when I got ready to put all of that within the book, I did that within a 3-day period. Is God calling you to write a book? There's a 2-part session to write your first book chapter with our team. Visit unlockingyourbook.com for more information.